Listen, we often delve into serious historical archives, discussing great eras and major events. Yet sometimes, life throws us plots so outrageous that the best Hollywood screenwriters would find themselves nervously smoking in the corner, realizing their own incompetence. I've compiled for you an absolute top selection, showcasing human ingenuity, audacity, and brilliant absurdity. Today, you'll learn about how a typical portly British pensioner managed to sneak a priceless masterpiece by Goya out of the country's main secure gallery through a men's restroom window, all because he was genuinely irritated by the television tax. You'll also hear about how a clever prankster from the 19th century left a 100,000-strong occupying army without food, orchestrating a grand fake party, and, amidst the incredible chaos, elegantly robbed the entire city. And how an ordinary dock worker, who had never truly held a golf club, repeatedly infiltrated the most elite golf tournament, driving stiff-necked judges to distraction with cheap fake mustaches and wigs. These stories will truly blow your mind, I assure you. Brew some tea, pour yourself coffee, and get comfortable. As usual, all I ask from you is a like and a comment. Let's get started. Story number 1. The Duke's abduction through a restroom window. London, late summer, 1961. The National Gallery is abuzz with an unprecedented excitement. The British government has just purchased the portrait of the Duke of Wellington by the great Spanish artist Francisco Goya. The price tag? Almost £400,000, an astronomical sum for those times. The painting, now a national treasure, was ceremoniously unveiled for public viewing. Velvet ropes surround it. Guards patrol the halls with gravity. A complex alarm system is activated at full capacity. It seemed as if not even a mouse could sneak by, not a single chance. Then, a gloomy London morning arrived on the 22nd of August. The guards conducted their usual rounds, one step and another, a turn of the head, and on the wall, emptiness. Just bare wallpaper and a lonely hook. The portrait was nowhere in sight, no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no broken glass either. The police were in absolute panic. Morning newspapers exploded with headlines about a brazen gang of international art thieves. Investigators searched for the Italian mafia, sought out sophisticated millionaire collectors with personal submarines, and shut down ports and train stations. Frankly speaking, the best detectives in the kingdom were at their wits' end trying to figure out how these criminal geniuses circumvented the security system. But wait, a closer look reveals that nothing was as it seemed. There were no black turtlenecks, helicopters, or lasers, nor glasses of expensive champagne. While the London police were on the hunt for criminal masterminds, the masterpiece lay peacefully in an ordinary wardrobe behind a plywood back panel. Inside the bedroom of a 61-year-old unemployed bus driver named Kempton Banton. Yes, just a typical pensioner, portly and good-natured, someone who enjoyed chatting in the local pub in the evenings. How did he pull it off? Listen. This is the funniest part. Kempton simply read in the morning newspaper, which he was perusing over breakfast, that the tricky alarm system in the gallery was turned off every morning for a couple of hours. Why? So that the cleaners could peacefully wash the floors. The grandfather simply arrived at the magnificent building, hoisted himself up, climbed through the slightly ajar window of the men's restroom, walked into the main hall, removed a portrait from the wall, tucked it under his arm, and calmly exited through the back door. That's it. No special effects. But why? Why did the bus driver need Goya? For the millions on the black market? Oh no. Kempton held a deep, genuine grievance against the government apparatus. The authorities demanded that all citizens pay a tax for watching television, while Kempton believed that for lonely, impoverished elderly individuals, the television was their only window to the world, their sole source of joy. To impose a tax on them was flagrant injustice. He began sending anonymous letters to the press, demanding a ransom. The condition was simple. Let the government allocate £140,000 for paying TV licenses for poor pensioners, and the Duke would be returned home safe and sound. The police reading these letters thought it was someone's silly prank. Meanwhile, Kempton kept the masterpiece hidden in his cupboard for 4 years. His wife didn't even suspect that she was sleeping just a meter away from a national treasure. Only after many years, having finally realized that the stubborn officials wouldn't budge, our retiree with a heightened sense of justice gave in. He simply brought the painting to the train station, placed it in storage, and sent the receipt to the newspaper's editorial office. Then, he went to the police station and confessed to everything. The trial resembled a theatrical comedy. The jurors laughed so hard at the heartfelt tales of the good-natured grandfather that they acquitted him of the main charge. The lawyer skillfully argued that Banton never intended to keep the canvas for himself permanently, and according to the laws of that time, if you took something with the intention to return it, it wasn't theft. He was only convicted for the theft of the wooden frame of the painting, which he had accidentally lost somewhere. The verdict? 3 months in prison and the status of an absolute folk hero. That's how an ordinary driver outsmarted the security system of the country's main gallery, merely defending the right of the elderly to watch evening shows. Amazing, isn't it? Sometimes the most notorious crimes are committed not out of greed, but from a big, albeit somewhat peculiar heart. By the way, friends, for the most curious among you, I've left links to all the original sources in the description. Check it out. Now, let's continue. Story number 2. The man who built his own subway, with a shovel and determination. It took place in a small farming town, far from bustling metropolises, at the beginning of the 60s of the last century. An ordinary man named William Little, or, as the journalists later dubbed him, the Mole Man. Honestly, William was the most inconspicuous neighbor one could imagine. Short, quiet, always in a worn-out jacket. He lived in a modest house with an overgrown garden on the outskirts of London. He rarely interacted with anyone, didn't attend parties, just a retiree being a retiree. But William had a huge secret, and it grew every day, or rather, every night. You see, William greatly disliked it when people interfered in his life. He also harbored a deep hatred for the noise of cars and the bustle of the streets. What he craved was tranquility, profound and absolute peace that could only be found underground. One day, armed with a simple shovel and an old bucket, he descended into his cellar and began to dig. Initially, it was merely a small pit for a foundation, but it quickly evolved into a short tunnel, and then William found himself unable to stop. Picture this scene. Nighttime in the city, everyone asleep, while a man laboriously toils underground for decades under the dim light of a bulb. For 40 long years, William excavated his own subterranean labyrinth. He wasn't an engineer, nor did he possess blueprints. He simply dug wherever he felt like it. The tunnels branched out in every direction, resembling the roots of a giant tree. Some were so wide that one could walk through them comfortably without stooping, while others narrowed to tiny crawl spaces. He reinforced the ceilings with old boards, pieces of bricks, and discarded chunks of concrete he found at dump sites. He even ran electricity down there. And the most astonishing part? None of his neighbors had any idea of the extent of his underground empire. 40 years. How was that possible? Well, William was incredibly meticulous. He would carry out the excavated earth at night, discreetly scattering it in his garden. As a result, the level of his property rose nearly 15 feet, burying the fences and the first floor of his house beneath the soil. However, the neighbors simply thought the old man was passionate about landscaping. A peculiar design indeed, but who would forbid a person from loving tall flower beds? His underground world became his refuge. He furnished it with cozy little rooms, bringing in old furniture and a radio. It was cool in the summer and warm in the winter. No heating bills, no car noise, perfect silence. But, as it often goes, any secret eventually yearns to be uncovered. After 40 years of meticulous labor, city officials decided to investigate complaints from neighbors about strange ground depressions on the road near William's house. The asphalt had started to sag suspiciously. Workers arrived, dug a little, and were stunned. Before them lay an entrance to an underground metropolis. When inspectors descended, they could hardly believe their eyes. The network of tunnels stretched for dozens of feet in every direction, extending well beyond William's property, diving under the road and surrounding houses. It resembled a set from a science fiction film. Experts were baffled at how one elderly man with a shovel could excavate an amount of earth equivalent to several double-decker buses without causing half the street to collapse. This seemed physically impossible. Naturally, the authorities were horrified by the potential danger. William was immediately evicted, and his underground kingdom was filled with concrete to prevent the street from caving in. This cost the city a fortune. Yet, what was remarkable was that no one felt animosity towards William. Instead, they were simply filled with wonder. How could one man, without machinery or budget, driven only by stubbornness and a desire for quiet, accomplish such a monumental feat of engineering? This is a tale about the boundless potential of human determination. It illustrates that sometimes the most astonishing construction of the century occurs not under public scrutiny, but deep below, illuminated by the faint glow of a single light bulb. William Little is remembered by the townsfolk as the most diligent and secretive builder in history. His house, though it has lost its mysterious underground chambers, still stands as a testament to human eccentricity. Fascinating, isn't it? And this is just the beginning. Now, let me tell you the third story. An outrageous racer and the slowest police chase in history, set in England. Kent County, January 1896. The calm, sleepy town of Petticoat. Picture an idyllic Victorian postcard. Ladies dressed in long gowns with lace parasols, gentlemen in top hats leisurely strolling with heavy canes, the soft clatter of horse hooves on cobblestone. The air is fragrant with fresh pastries, morning dampness, and peat. There's no stress to be found. Time flows slowly, like thick, crystallized honey. Automobiles did exist, of course, but back then, they were disdainfully referred to as horseless carriages and were met with an overwhelming, even colossal suspicion. The British government even enacted a strict law, harsh and unforgiving. According to this legislation, the speed of any mechanical vehicle in town could not exceed 3 kilometers per hour. 3. Frankly, a pedestrian walks faster. Moreover, a designated person was required by law to walk in front of the car, waving a red flag to alert bystanders of the impending danger. Honestly, a red flag and the speed of a limping turtle. However, in every town there exists a rebellious spirit. Meet Walter Arnold, a respected man and owner of the local agency selling these marvelous new machines. Walter was utterly tired of crawling down the streets behind a guy with a piece of red cloth. It killed all the advertising right there. Who would buy an expensive car if it could barely outpace a weary pony? On that fateful January day, Walter decided to challenge the system. He climbed into his shiny new automobile and turned on the engine. The noise was extraordinary. A cloud of smoke erupted from the exhaust. There was no one with a flag ahead of him. Walter adjusted his cap, gripped the steering wheel firmly, pulled the levers, and surged out onto Petticoat Street. Listen, it was a real sensation. He accelerated his vehicle to a completely unimaginable speed, monstrous by those standards, 13 kilometers per hour. Yes, you heard that right. 13 kilometers per hour. In the eyes of respectable Britons, it was akin to a meteorite falling. Chickens frantically scattered in backyards, shedding feathers. Ladies clutched their hats in alarm. Gentlemen shook their umbrellas indignantly in the wake of the dust storm. A madman. He would tear apart space itself. But justice was not asleep. A local constable was on duty. Seeing this outrageous metallic comet flouting all conceivable laws of physics and British decency, the officer realized he needed to act immediately. He, of course, had no car. He would need to find and harness a horse. But he had a bicycle. A standard heavy-duty service bicycle. And thus began the chase. The most epic police pursuit of the 19th century. Just picture this cinematic scene. Walter Arnold, with a scarf fluttering in the wind, roars ahead at a speed of 13 kilometers per hour, while behind him, panting and furiously pedaling, Constable is in hot pursuit. For 8 kilometers, a long stretch of road, the lawman followed the elusive lawbreaker down country lanes. It was a true thriller, captured in slow motion. Finally, the constable found a second wind. He pushed harder, caught up to the car, and breathlessly commanding, ordered him to stop. Walter, smiling, surrendered. He was dragged off to court. The judge was utterly shocked by such audacity. speeding more than 4 times the limit and driving without a man waving a red flag. Walter received a fine, 1 shilling and a bit of change to cover court costs. This was the very first speeding ticket in human history. And the funniest part? Walter Arnold was absolutely thrilled. This trial became the best advertisement for his business. All of London buzzed about the marvelous carriage that sped along so quickly that it could barely be caught by a police officer on a bicycle. Sales skyrocketed. Soon after, the absurd law about the red flag was abolished, raising the speed limit to 22 kilometers per hour. In celebration of this event, motorists organized a festive car parade. Sometimes, to move progress from a standstill, one just needs to be a bit mischievous. It's amusing how our perception of time and speed changes. What once seemed like a mad dash into the unknown now brings nothing but smiles. Story number 4. A man who turned his zip code into a gold mine. Picture this: the 90s, Britain. A harsh and rainy climate where everyone was accustomed to following the rules. Back then, advertising campaigns were just beginning to grasp the power of mass mailing. The mailboxes of ordinary citizens overflowed daily with an endless stream of junk mail. They offered everything, from credit cards with outrageous interest rates to cures for baldness and miraculous vacuum cleaners. People became furious, tossing these piles of paper without a glance. Yet the Postal Service operated like clockwork, and the trash continued to pour in. Now, imagine Richard Ashley, just an ordinary-looking guy. Richard, to be honest, was an incredibly calm individual, but even he was pushed to his breaking point by this paper avalanche. Tired of emptying tons of advertising brochures out of his mailbox each evening addressed to "Dear Homeowner," most of us would just grumble and haul the junk to the trash. But Richard had a clever idea. He noticed one tiny detail across all these envelopes. There was always a return address and a little note: postage paid by recipient, meaning the company sending the spam was responsible for covering the delivery costs if the letter bounced back to them. It was a standard business tactic to make it easier for clients to return filled-out forms. And then, a light bulb went off in Richard's head. He realized the system was vulnerable. If corporations are so eager to cover shipping costs, why not assist them in spending a little money? He didn't file complaints or make calls to customer service. Richard headed to the hardware store. He purchased several heavy solid bricks, the standard red ones typically used for paving paths or constructing walls. He brought them home and carefully attached an envelope to each brick with tape, clearly marked with the words, "Shipping costs to be paid by the recipient." Yes, indeed, a brick and an envelope. The next day, he simply carried this heavy artillery to the nearest post office and calmly placed it on the counter. The postal clerk was taken aback. Rules are rules. Richard pointed to the writing on the envelope. "Shipping costs to be paid by the recipient," he said with a charming smile. "Send it." The clerk began flipping through thick manuals, searching for rules that prohibited sending bricks at someone else's expense. And you know what? No such rule existed. The Royal Mail Guidelines made no mention of prohibiting the attachment of a promotional envelope to building materials. The weight of the package fell within acceptable limits for parcels. Formally, Richard wasn't breaking any laws. The postal worker sighed, weighed the bricks, and affixed barcodes. Thus, the heavy packages set off on their journey across the country. Imagine the expression on a major bank manager's face when a courier delivered a box with a brick and presented a hefty bill for shipping. It was a disaster for corporate budgets. The cost of sending a letter was minimal, but shipping a brick represented a significant expenditure. News of Richard's brilliant subversion quickly spread throughout the region and then across the country. Neighbors began to follow suit. Some sent back old magazines, others returned stones from the beach. One prankster even managed to attach an envelope to an old car tire. Post offices were inundated with construction debris and scrap metal, which were dutifully delivered to corporate headquarters at their own cost. Advertisers were in an uproar. Their reverse shipping expenses soared. They pleaded with the Postal Service to stop this madness, but the Postal Service simply shrugged. No rules were broken. We are obligated to deliver what you promise to pay for. Ultimately, corporations rushed to alter their policies. They removed the phrase shipping costs to be paid by the recipient from bulk mailings. The avalanche of spam sharply declined, as sending it became too risky. Richard Ashley, an ordinary-looking guy, single-handedly compelled a multi-million-dollar industry to change its rules and provided millions of people with clean mailboxes. This shows how a small loophole in a vast system and a bit of healthy audacity can work wonders. No crime involved, just a heavy brick and the inexorable force of bureaucracy turned against itself. Story number 5. How an ordinary coffee pot spied on the world and inadvertently shaped our future. The early 90s. England, the University of Cambridge, the sanctum of British science, where the spirits of Newton and Darwin linger. In a computer lab, dimly lit by the flickering of chunky monitors, brilliant programmers were hard at work. This was an era when the internet was just starting to emerge. Ordinary people were still unfamiliar with terms like browser and online, yet scientists were already constructing networks capable of transmitting vast amounts of text, which were considered monumental for that time. Amidst the cables, floppy disks, and intelligent discussions concerning data transmission protocols, one colossal and utterly unbearable problem loomed large: the lack of coffee. You see, the building housing dozens of programmers had merely one coffee maker, a standard drip coffee maker with a transparent glass carafe. This lone machine resided down the hallway on a completely different floor in what was known as the Trojan Room. Imagine the tragedy befalling a genius. A researcher deeply engrossed in writing complicated code is stricken by fatigue. Caffeine is a desperate necessity. Rising from their desk, they trek down a long corridor, descend the creaky staircase, and approach the coffee maker, only to find it empty. Just a few sad, burnt drops remain from someone else's earlier brew. Someone had consumed everything before them without brewing a new pot. Thus, they had to return to their workstation empty-handed, cursing the injustice of the universe. This scenario played out multiple times each day. It devastated productivity and wreaked havoc on their nerves. Scientists found themselves undertaking genuine expeditions to see if coffee was available. One day, two researchers, Quentin Stafford Fraser and Paul Jardetsky, decided they had had enough. They weren't willing to run around the building aimlessly anymore. Instead, they resolved to tackle the issue as any programmers would, using technology and sheer, unadulterated laziness. They discovered an old discarded video camera, mounted it on a lab tripod directly facing the coffee maker, and connected the camera to a computer. However, simply watching the video feed on one monitor was pointless. They needed everyone in the building to see the image. Quentin crafted a small program that would take a black and white snapshot of the coffee pot every few seconds. Paul developed the server side, which distributed this image throughout the university's local network. Now every programmer in the building could open a small window on their chunky monitor and see in real time whether the coffee pot was empty or full. This was a triumph. No more empty treks up and down the stairs. Coffee breaks became flawless. The system functioned reliably. They named it eCoffee. Yet, the story does not end there. A couple of years later, when the very first web browser capable of displaying images was developed, someone among the Cambridge intellectuals proposed, why not stream our coffee pot to the outside world? They made slight modifications to the code and connected the feed to the global network. On November 22, 1993, a black and white, grainy image of an ordinary glass carafe was made available to anyone in the world with internet access. This became the very first webcam in human history. And you know what happened next? Absolute mayhem. Millions of people from Japan, America, and Australia flocked to the Cambridge University website merely to gaze at the coffee pot. Servers were overwhelmed by the influx of visitors. People spent hours mesmerized by their screens, waiting for someone to come and pour some coffee. As the level of the dark liquid in the pot rose or fell, spirited discussions erupted on forums around the globe. Individuals sent scientists emails requesting, "Hey folks, you've run out of coffee, brew a fresh pot, we are here in Tokyo waiting." It may sound absurd, but for the people of that time, the ability to witness a piece of reality in real time from 1,000 kilometers away was nothing short of a marvel. The coffee maker became a worldwide sensation. Newspapers wrote about it, and it was discussed at technology conferences. For a decade, the camera continuously broadcast the life of this glass pot. When, in 2001, the laboratory decided to relocate to a different building and end the legendary broadcast, it made headlines globally. The last drops of coffee were consumed by a programmer, and the old, broken coffee machine was auctioned off for charity. It was purchased by a German building of the magazine Spiegel for £3,500, a considerable sum for a piece of plastic and glass. Just like that. From a simple reluctance to climb the stairs and be disappointed by an empty cup, emerged a technology that forever altered our world. Video calls, live broadcasts, streaming. It all began with one tiny, grainy image of a coffee pot in Cambridge. Funny, isn't it? Sometimes the greatest discoveries are made not by those wanting to change the universe, but by those simply wanting to enjoy their coffee while it's hot. Story number 6. An island that misled the best cartographers in the world for centuries. Imagine the endless expanses of the Pacific Ocean between Australia and New Caledonia in warm coral waters. If you were to open an old world atlas published around the late 19th or even mid-20th century, you'd likely find a tiny dot on it. Next to it, the name Sandy Island would be neatly inscribed. This wasn't some forsaken rock the size of a dining table. No, the maps depicted it as a rather substantial piece of land. The story of this island began long ago, when the legendary Captain James Cook, while exploring these waters, made a note in his journal about a sandy shoal in the area. Centuries later, in 1876, the crew of the British whaling ship Velocity officially reported, "Sighted a sandy island, logging coordinates." From that moment forward, Sandy Island began its triumphant journey across maps worldwide. The British Admiralty included it in their navigation charts. Following them, cartographers from other nations joined suit. Sandy Island was transcribed from encyclopedia to encyclopedia and textbook to textbook. Sailors plotted their courses to avoid its invisible reefs and fog. Decades passed, aircraft and radar emerged, and eventually, the all-seeing eye of satellites joined the fray. And do you know what? Sandy Island calmly transitioned into the digital age. If you accessed famous online mapping services in the early 2000s, you would have noticed a dark, elongated outline right in the middle of the ocean. This island was officially recognized without dispute. However, there is one tiny yet significant twist to this narrative. At the end of 2012, a team of Australian geological scientists embarked on an expedition. They were studying tectonic plates in the Coral Sea. Their research vessel, named CERN Surveyor, was precisely on course, which ran directly through Sandy Island. The scientists stood on the captain's bridge, peering at the navigation instruments with furrowed brows. The devices indicated that a solid landmass, a huge sandbank, lay straight ahead. The captain, rummaging through nautical charts, commanded to reduce speed. No one wanted to run the expensive research vessel aground in the middle of the ocean. They went out onto the deck with binoculars, scanning the horizon with keen eyes. The sun was blinding, seagulls were screeching, and the waves gently lapped against the hull. But there was no island. There was absolutely nothing. No palm trees, no sand, no cliffs, only the endless blue expanse of the ocean in all directions. Water, water, and more water. The scientists exchanged glances. Could there be an error in the coordinates? They double-checked the instruments. Satellites indicated they were at Sandy Island, yet outside the depth was a respectable kilometer. It was physically impossible to strand the ship here unless the sandbank lay at the bottom of the abyss. The captain ordered a thorough search of the area. They tacked back and forth, scanning the seabed with sonar. Nothing. No underwater formations that could have submerged due to an earthquake. Just a smooth, flat bottom at an enormous depth. Sandy Island simply did not exist, and most likely never had. How did this happen? How could a landmass the size of a small town dupe the entire human race for over 100 years? When the scientists returned to shore and announced the disappearance of the island, a grand investigation was launched. Cartographers, historians, and geographers were left scratching their heads. It turned out that it was all due to the plain effect of a broken telephone, compounded by the conservatism of cartography. That same whaling ship captain in the 19th century likely saw not an island, but what is known as a pumice raft. These are massive accumulations of light volcanic pumice that are sometimes ejected by underwater volcanoes and drift across the ocean. From a distance, they appear exactly like sandy shoals. The sailor made a mistake, recorded the coordinates, and then bureaucracy took over. Cartographers are cautious people. They prefer to map a non-existent reef to prevent ships from encountering it, rather than remove an actual landmass and risk causing a shipwreck. Thus, Sandy Island was solidified on paper. And when the era of digital maps began, programmers simply digitized old paper atlases without personally verifying each rock. If an island appeared on the old chart, it would also be present on the new digital version. Furthermore, the black rectangles on some online maps were merely pixelated patches concealing a lack of satellite data for that square. The algorithms assumed it was land. After the return of the Australian expedition, Sandy Island was officially erased. It vanished from all digital globes, atlases, and nautical records. The Ghost Island, which had existed on paper for 150 years, dissolved into oblivion with just a few clicks of a mouse. This is a story about how, even in an age of absolute information, we can still lose ourselves in the illusions crafted by our ancestors. The ocean still holds its secrets, and past mistakes can travel through time, masquerading as immutable facts. Story number 7. The four-legged detective who saved the honor of an entire empire. London, spring of 1966. All of Britain buzzes like a disturbed hive. The nation is gearing up to host the planet's premier sporting event. For the English, the World Cup is not just a game, it is a religion. It represents their national pride. In a sign of great trust, the main trophy, a golden statuette of the goddess Nike, is brought to the capital. Nearly 2 kilograms of pure gold, a priceless relic. The trophy is displayed for public viewing in the Central Hall of Westminster. Stamp exhibitions, crowds of onlookers, camera flashes. Security is, of course, present. Police in formal suits, grim expressions. It seemed that the national treasure was under reliable lock and key. But then comes Sunday, and a church service is taking place in the building. The guards relax a bit, shifting their duties. Someone turns away for just a couple of minutes, and that's all it takes. When the officer returns to the display case, he freezes in shock. The lock is broken, the glass is pushed aside, and the golden goddess has vanished. Imagine the scale of this catastrophe. Only a few months remain until the tournament begins. To be honest, it was an absolute disaster for the country's reputation. The best minds of Scotland Yard are put on high alert. Newspapers are screaming about the disgrace. Ministers sweat in their chairs. Raids, interrogations, and clandestine meetings with informants commence. The criminal underworld of London is turned upside down. A ransom letter arrives. The police set up a sting operation, catching a petty thief, but he turns out to be just a pawn, unaware of where the trophy is hidden. Time passes. Hope diminishes with each day. Football officials, in a state of panic, secretly order an accurate replica of the trophy from a local jeweler, just to have something to present to the winners. And then, a week after the grand theft, our main character steps into the spotlight. Meet David Corbett, an ordinary 26-year-old sailor living in a modest area in South London, and his dog named Pickles. A black and white mutt, very curious, with a wet nose and a happily wagging tail. That Sunday evening, David simply went out for a stroll. He needed to reach the nearest phone booth to call his brother. Pickles raced alongside him, sniffing every post and bush. A normal routine, nothing historical. Suddenly, Pickles stops near a hedge at a neighbor's house, starts whimpering insistently, and sniffs an old, dirty bag tightly wrapped in newspaper and tied with ordinary twine. David steps closer and bends down. At that time, the nation was in turmoil, and David's first thought was of a bomb. He carefully tears the paper with his fingertips. Initially, he sees a dark wooden base, and then something yellow, gold, and shiny catches his eye. He fully removes the newspaper and can hardly believe what he sees. There, in the dust under the bush, lies the very statuette that the entire royal entourage has been searching for, the World Cup. David grabs the trophy, shoves it under his jacket, and races to the police station. He bursts inside, places the gold on the desk of the duty sergeant, and exhales. "I think I found what you're looking for." The sergeant looks at the cup, then at David, and then at the dog, and, as dictated by the nature of strict law enforcement, promptly arrests David himself. Well, what did you expect? A classic scenario. The primary suspect is the one who discovered the evidence. Hours of questioning ensue, with bright lights shining in his eyes. However, David has an ironclad alibi, and the tale is too absurd to be fabricated. Soon, the police realize the kid was merely walking his dog. And that's when the real triumph begins. Pickles becomes a superstar. An ordinary mutt overshadows politicians and football players. News networks from around the globe line up outside the Corbett house. Pickles is declared Dog of the Year. He is awarded a silver medal and a check for a substantial sum. Incidentally, with that money, David is able to purchase a nice home. But the most touching moment came later, when the tournament finally took place. The home team splendidly won the championship, and a grand banquet was arranged for the players and prominent guests. And do you know who was the guest of honor at this exclusive dinner? Yes, our black and white detective. Pickles was officially granted permission to attend the banquet. Moreover, he was allowed to lick the plates after the lavish dinner, which is the pinnacle of dreams for any dog. Soon, he even starred in a movie, becoming a genuine pop culture icon of that time. As for the brazen thieves who executed the heist of the century, frankly, they were never caught. The planet's main trophy was not saved by the brilliance of detectives, complex technologies, or undercover agents. It was rescued by the wet nose of a curious mutt who simply wanted to sniff the strange bundle under the bush. Sometimes, the fate of the world hangs by a thin thread, or, in our case, an old newspaper bundle. Story number 8. An elephant who decided that traveling by trains was too mundane. July 1950, West Germany, the city of Wuppertal. Listen, Wuppertal is a truly unique place. A river flows through it, and right above runs a suspended railway. A genuine monorail. The cars don't glide along tracks, they dangle beneath them, swaying gently above the water at a height of 12 meters. A kind of iron dragon soaring over the city. For the locals, it's just common public transport, but for visitors, it's a real engineering marvel. And it is to this city that a circus arrives. The ringmaster Franz Althoff was a man of incredible energy and a master of grand sensations. He loved to create shows out of nothing. He had a star attraction, a young Indian elephant named Tuffy. She was only 4 years old. The girl was very clever, kind, and, as it seemed at the time, completely unflappable. Franz had already taken her on regular trams in other cities, and she behaved like the perfect passenger. Franz gazes at the suspended trams floating above the river. In his mind, a brilliant plan, or so he thought, begins to form. What if we buy a ticket for Tuffy and take her on the suspended train? The journalists would go wild with excitement. It was the morning of the 21st of July. The circus director approaches the ticket counter and calmly purchases 4 standard second-class tickets. Well, an elephant does take up space after all. One must be honest. They lead Tuffy to the platform. The female elephant obediently steps into the carriage. Immediately behind her, a massive crowd of reporters squeezes in. Journalists with bulky cameras, the clicks of shutters, blinding flashes of magnesium. It's incredibly cramped inside, and there isn't enough air. The doors hiss as they close. The tram starts moving and glides out into the middle of the river. Now imagine yourself in the shoes of a 4-year-old animal. The floor shakes. The wheels screech right above her head. The carriage sways from side to side. People are shouting from all around, and blinding white flashes hit her eyes. Tuffy was a patient girl, but everyone has their limits. Patience has its breaking point. Picture that chaotic scene in a confined space. 2 tons of panic. Tuffy lets out a piercing trumpet. The journalists, white as chalk, press themselves against the walls, dropping their notebooks and equipment. The elephant abruptly turns around. She takes a step, toppling a bench, crashing through the flimsy wall of the carriage along with the panoramic glass, and leaps out of the window, falling the equivalent of 12 meters. Below is the Wupper River. An icy, ringing silence fills the carriage. The only sound is the rush of wind through the enormous hole. Franz, in a frenzy, rushes to the emergency brake. The train screeches to a halt. Reporters, pale as chalk, lean out of the broken window, bracing themselves for tragedy. And what do they see? Below, there is a gigantic, simply epic splash. The Wupper River at that spot was quite shallow, about half a meter, but Tuffy had incredibly good fortune. She landed perfectly in the softest, deepest, and leafy pit. The thick mud acted like an ideal natural airbag. A gray giant emerges from the murky water. Tuffy shakes herself off, snorting indignantly and creating a little fountain, and, as if nothing happened, she strolls leisurely toward the shore. No fractures, no serious injuries, just a tiny scratch on her side. She emerges onto dry land, where she is immediately caught by the panicked Franz and happily devours the offered apple. But the most humorous part of this story is the behavior of the press. The carriage contained dozens of professional photographers from the country's top publications. They were there specifically for sensational shots, with their cameras at the ready. But when the 2-ton elephant jumped out the window, they fell into such a primitive stupor that not one of them, absolutely not a single person, managed to press the shutter button. All those famous historical postcards depicting the falling elephant, which were later sold in the millions, are in fact just crude photo montages. A picture seamlessly blended from a photograph of a river and an image of a random elephant. Tuffy had an extensive and remarkably joyful life, performing for nearly 40 years, becoming a beloved icon across Europe. In response, the management of the transportation company in Wuppertal instituted an unwavering rule: no elephants in the carriages, ever, even if they purchased tickets for the entire train. Ironic, isn't it? A person can concoct the cleverest advertising campaign, yet nature always has a far more spectacular storyline. Story number 9. A pie with a prophecy that decided gravity was merely someone's opinion. June, summer of 1954, America, Illinois. A small town with a dull but cozy name, Oak Park. Picture a typical American suburb of that era. Neatly trimmed lawns, white picket fences, the scent of freshly mowed grass, and barbecue wafting through the air. Children are riding bicycles, and Mrs. Wilson, the local culinary legend, is taking her famous blueberry pie out of the oven. Hot, with a perfectly crisp crust bubbling with purple juice. Mrs. Wilson places this culinary masterpiece on the kitchen windowsill to cool. A routine task, everyone does this. The window overlooks the backyard, where the leaves of an old elm rustle quietly. Now, frankly, this is the part of the story that's incredibly hard to believe if it weren't for the dozens of witnesses. That day, a thunderstorm wasn't just brewing. A powerful storm front was forming. The sky darkened to a leaden hue, and the wind began to howl fiercely and erratically. The air thickened with electricity. You know that feeling before a fierce storm, when the hair on your arms stands slightly on end? Somewhere in the distance, a few blocks away from the Wilsons' house, a small yet very angry tornado was forming. A real tornado, just in miniature. It didn't uproot houses, but it playfully tore off shed roofs and broke tree branches. The funnel swirled, gained strength, and, with a terrifying roar, barreled straight through residential neighborhoods. Mrs. Wilson, hearing that otherworldly rumble, rushed to close the windows. She darted into the kitchen, stretched her hands toward the windowsill, and froze. The pie was gone, just a round, clean mark on the painted wood. She peered into the yard. The funnel of the tornado was just passing by her fence, sucking in dust, leaves, and discarded children's toys. Mrs. Wilson sighed. It was a shame about the pie, of course. It was probably scattered all over the street, transformed into a sticky blueberry mush on someone's windshield. But tornadoes are unpredictable. Scientists are still puzzling over the aerodynamics of these funnels. Sometimes they destroy brick walls, yet leave a fragile porcelain set untouched on the table. The tornado swept through Oak Park, traveled several miles, leaped over the river, and began to lose power over the neighboring town of River Forest. The wind calmed, the funnel dissipated, and everything it had sucked in started to fall back to the earth. Now imagine River Forest in the yard of the Thompson family home. Mr. Thompson steps onto the porch to assess the damage after the storm. The winds have died down. A light drizzle is falling quietly. Suddenly, he hears a peculiar muffled sound. Plop. Right in the center of his perfectly manicured damp lawn lies a pie and a metal tin, slightly crinkled on one edge, but overall completely intact. The blueberry filling hasn't even oozed out. Furthermore, it is still warm. Mr. Thompson walked over to investigate, cautiously prodding the find with his finger and taking a sniff. It smelled absolutely divine. While he was a pragmatic man, at this moment, his logic took a significant detour. A freshly baked dessert had fallen from the sky. Later, as neighbors started to swap stories about damage, Mrs. Wilson complained about her stolen baked goods. The rumors reached the Thompsons, who lived nearly 10 kilometers away. Meteorologists, consulted by journalists, tried to explain this phenomenon. According to their theory, the pie, encased in the heavy metal tin, acted like a perfect aerodynamic disc. A tornado had swept it up from a window, like a giant vacuum cleaner, pulling it into the calm center of the storm's eye, where there was no turbulence. There, the pie gently levitated on a cushion of air, traveling several miles over the towns, and when the winds died down, it glided onto Mr. Thompson's lawn as gently as a parachute. Naturally, no one dared to eat the pie. Who knows what kind of dust it had collected in the clouds? However, the story of how gravity took a break for a serving of blueberry dessert made it into all the local newspapers. Sometimes nature takes things from us, not to destroy, but simply to pull off a trick that no illusionist in the world could replicate. Story number 10. An accidental hammer strike that opened up an entire underground world. Turkey, Cappadocia, 1963. This region is famous for its whimsical rock formations resembling giant mushrooms or fairy chimneys. For centuries, locals have lived in caves carved directly into the soft volcanic tuff. It's a common practice. A home in a rock keeps cool in the summer and warm in the winter. In one such village lived a simple man we'll call Amer. He decided to do a bit of remodeling in his basement, needing extra space to store potatoes or perhaps some chickens. Amer grabbed a sledgehammer and swung it at the wall with all his might. Boom! To his surprise, the wall was surprisingly thin and yielding. The masonry crumbled, sending up a cloud of dust. Behind it lay a dark, glowing hole. A chill and dampness wafted from it. Amer shone a flashlight inside. The beam of light revealed not just a small storage room, but a spacious chamber hewn from the rock, and another passage beyond it. And yet another. Curiosity took hold. Amer stepped through the opening, moving from one room to another, descending a narrow staircase, only to realize he was lost. This wasn't a basement, it was a labyrinth. Thus, the underground city of Derinkuyu was rediscovered, a colossal subterranean metropolis forgotten by the world for centuries. Imagine an anthill as tall as a skyscraper, extending not upward but downward, deep into the earth. 18 floors, 18 levels, hand-carved into the soft rock millennia ago. This city extended underground to a depth of 60 meters, or perhaps even deeper. It has yet to be fully explored. When archaeologists descended into its depths, they were left speechless. What they discovered was not merely a refuge for a few days, but a fully fledged metropolis designed to accommodate 20,000 people. Complete with livestock and provisions of food and wine, it had everything. Underground stables on the upper levels to prevent the smell of manure from reaching below. A massive kitchen equipped with ovens, the smoke from which was cleverly vented through ingenious hidden shafts to the surface, ensuring that enemies would not notice. There were wine presses, schools, churches with columns, weapon storage facilities, and even a prison and graveyards. But the most ingenious aspect was the ventilation and security system. The city was permeated by thousands of vertical shafts, delivering fresh air to the lowest levels. Down there, breathing was just as easy as on the surface, while the entrances to the tunnels were sealed by enormous stone millstones weighing half a ton. These circular doors could only be opened from the inside, making it impossible to shift them from the outside. This provided perfect protection against any invaders. Who built this marvel and for what purpose? Scholars are still debating this. It's possible that the early Christians hid here from Roman persecutions. Alternatively, the city may have begun construction thousands of years ago by the Hittites. Residents could spend months underground without seeing the sun, in complete safety and comfort, while wars raged above. What is most astonishing is that Derinkuyu is not the only one. Later, in the region, dozens of other underground cities were discovered, many interlinked by kilometers of tunnels. An entire subterranean civilization lay hidden beneath the feet of unsuspecting farmers who grazed their goats on the roofs of ancient temples for years. Omer, the Turk with a sledgehammer, became a local legend. His accidental strike against a wall revealed one of the most incredible archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. Today, tourists from all around the world wander through the very corridors where entire nations once sought refuge. So, if you happen to undertake renovations and demolish a wall in your storage room, be cautious. Who knows, there might be more than just a neighboring apartment hidden behind it, but rather an entrance to a lost world. Story number 11. The Mysterious Messenger from the Abyss and His Precious Cargo. Scotland, the St. Kilda Archipelago, the most remote and lonely archipelago of the British Isles. Accessing it is only possible by boat, and even then, not in any weather. The locals are rugged individuals, accustomed to harsh seas and salty sprays. Their lives are simple and filled with labor. In 1885, an event occurred on one of these islands, Herta, which the residents passed down as a legend. At that time, there was no telegraph or radio on the island. Mail was delivered by ships, which docked here once every 6 months if the weather was favorable. The inhabitants were completely cut off from the outside world, but sometimes they desperately needed to send a message to the mainland, so they devised their own unique method of communication. They would take a piece of wood, carve a small cavity in it, place a letter wrapped in sheep's bladders for waterproofing inside, and additionally include a coin, a payment for whoever found the message on the shores of Scotland and mailed it. This structure was dubbed the St. Kilda Postboat. One day, following an especially fierce storm, something peculiar washed ashore on the coast of Herta. It wasn't a small wooden boat, but a bottle. A regular glass wine bottle, yet something was inside it. The islanders, burning with curiosity, pulled out the cork. Within lay a rolled-up piece of paper. It was a letter. But not just any letter. It was a cry for help. The author of the message wrote that he was a sailor from an Australian ship that had sunk in the Indian Ocean. He and several other survivors had been drifting on a raft for many days. They were running out of water and had no idea where they were. The letter concluded with a desperate plea. Whoever finds this, please inform the authorities. We are dying. The residents of St. Kilda were shocked. They exchanged glances. The Indian Ocean, that's on the other side of the world. How could a bottle have traveled thousands of miles to go around Africa, cross the Atlantic, and end up right here on their tiny island? It seemed unbelievable. But the most astonishing part was the date. The letter had been written just 2 weeks prior. 2 weeks! Even the fastest clipper couldn't cover such a distance in that time. The bottle couldn't have teleported. Thus, the wreck must have occurred somewhere nearby, yet the letter clearly mentioned the Indian Ocean. The inhabitants of Herta concluded it must be some mistake or a cruel joke, but their conscience wouldn't allow them to simply discard the message. They resealed the bottle, added their own letter requesting the authorities be informed, and cast it back into the sea, hoping the current would carry it to the shores of Scotland. And then, a miracle happened. The bottle was found in the Hebrides. The letter was forwarded to the Admiralty. They dug into the archives and discovered something incredible. A vessel by that name did exist. It had indeed gone missing, but not in the Indian Ocean, rather in the Atlantic. It turned out that the ship's captain had become so disoriented during the storm that he couldn't comprehend where they were. He believed they were still in the Indian Ocean, while in reality, they had drifted far north to the shores of Europe. There was an error in the coordinates born from desperation and panic. Thanks to this bottle cast ashore at St. Kilda and the honesty of the islanders, rescuers were able to roughly determine the search area. They didn't locate the raft itself. Unfortunately, the ocean is vast, but they did find wreckage from the ship off the coast of Ireland. This confirmed the loss of the vessel and gave peace to the families of the sailors who had spent years wondering what had happened to their loved ones. This story became a legend. It demonstrated that even in a world without the internet and satellites, a small glass bottle can serve as a harbinger of fate, transcending distances and navigation errors. The residents of St. Kilda long reminisced about that day, when the ocean brought them a message from beyond, making them feel part of a vast world connected by invisible threads. It raises the question of how many more such bottles are adrift in the seas, holding someone's secrets and hopes. Perhaps one of them is currently making its way to your shore. Story number 12. Amber from the belly of a whale, worth more than diamonds. Imagine Yemen, February 2021. A group of 30 impoverished fishermen from the village of Al-Qaisa sets out to sea in their old, battered boats. Their lives are difficult. War, poverty, and the relentless search for sustenance have become their norm. They are accustomed to celebrating if they manage to catch a couple of buckets of fish to feed their families. That day, the sea was turbulent. Waves tossed their small vessels from side to side. Suddenly, one of the fishermen spotted something unusual bobbing on the water. It was the corpse of a dead sperm whale, enormous, bloated, drifting with the current. Generally, fishermen try to keep their distance from such finds. The stench of decay is awful, and sharks often circle nearby. But this time, something compelled them to approach closer. An old fisherman sniffed the air. Amid the foul odors of rotting flesh emerged another, barely perceptible yet distinctly sweet, musky scent. The fishermen's hearts raced. Could it be? They snagged the carcass with ropes and laboriously towed it to shore. There, on the beach, the entire village had gathered. The men drew their knives. They opened the belly of the ocean giant and discovered an enormous black waxy lump among the entrails. Amber, the legendary floating gold. A substance produced in the digestive tract of sperm whales as a protective response to irritation caused by sharp beaks of squids. Fresh amber smells terrible, but after sitting in seawater and basking in the sun, it develops a unique, complex aroma coveted by perfumers. It is used as a fixative in the most expensive perfumes in the world, Chanel, Dior, Gucci. And this piece weighed 127 kilograms. 127! For comparison, a gram of quality amber can be worth more than gold. The fishermen stared at their discovery in disbelief. In their hands, they held a fortune, unimaginable wealth. But what to do with such a treasure in a poor Yemeni village? They acted incredibly wisely. They didn't fight over the piece. They didn't attempt to sell it by parts on the black market for a pittance. The fishermen convened a council of elders. They agreed to sell the amber as a whole to a single large buyer from the Emirates. The deal was struck. The amount? $1,500,000 US. For these people, many of whom lived on just a couple of dollars a day, this was money from another universe. And here is where the most beautiful part of this story begins. They didn't disperse with the money. They divided the sum equally among all 35 members of that fishing trip. But before that, they set aside a portion of the funds to help those in need in their village. They donated money to widows, orphans, and the sick. With their shares, many of the fishermen purchased new homes. Some got married. In Yemen, a wedding is an expensive affair. Others bought new boats and engines to catch more fish. Some finally managed to send their children to school. The life of an entire village changed in a single day, thanks to, let's be honest, an unexpected gift from a whale. A single fortunate accident in the middle of the ocean. This story traveled around the world. She became a symbol of hope, a representation of the idea that even in the most challenging situations, when it seems like there is no way out, the sea can grant a miracle. And perhaps most importantly, wealth isn't merely about money, but rather the ability of people to come together and share fortune fairly. Isn't it amusing? We use expensive perfumes to smell exquisite, often without considering where that scent comes from and whose life it rescued from poverty. Story number 13. A man who lived in a closet and read books at night. Japan, Fukuoka, 2008. An ordinary and unremarkable apartment building. In one of the apartments lives a solitary man. Let's call him Mr. Tanaka. Mr. Tanaka began to notice strange occurrences. Food was disappearing from the refrigerator bit by bit. Yogurt, a couple of sausages, a piece of cheese. Initially, he thought he was the one consuming it and simply forgetting, as that can happen. However, he started to find crumbs on the floor, and most suspiciously, his shampoo was running out far too quickly. He concluded he might be losing his mind or that very clean mice had moved in, washing their hair. To verify his suspicions, Tanaka set up a hidden camera in the kitchen. He connected it to his mobile phone to see everything in real time. One day, while at work, he received a notification. Someone was in the kitchen. Tanaka looked at the screen. An unfamiliar woman was calmly walking around his apartment. She opened the fridge, took food, sat at the table, and started eating. Then she went to the bathroom, took a shower, wrapped herself in his towel, and vanished. She simply dissolved into thin air. In shock, Tanaka called the police. Officers arrived and searched the apartment. The windows were closed and the door was locked with 2 bolts. There were no signs of a break-in, nor was there any intruder. Where had she gone? Just as the police were about to leave, believing it was a prank or hallucination, one of them noticed the built-in wardrobe in the bedroom. An ordinary closet, stuffed with clothes and boxes. He pulled open the door, moved the suits aside, and there, on the top shelf, in the tiny space between the ceiling and the belongings, curled up was the very woman. Her name was Tatsuka Harikawa. She was 58 years old and homeless. The most astonishing part was that she had lived in Mr. Tanaka's closet for an entire year. Just think about that. She sneaked into the apartment when the owner left for work. It was quite simple. Once, he forgot to lock the front door. She entered and found the perfect refuge. From then on, she lived there like a mouse. She was incredibly tidy, never took more food than necessary to avoid raising suspicions. Bathed when the owner was out, read his books and newspapers but always returned them to their exact spot with precision. She even washed her clothes in his machine. In her hideout on the top shelf, they found only a thin mattress and a plastic bottle of water. No trash, perfect cleanliness. When asked why she chose that particular home, she replied, "It felt safe, and the owner seemed like a nice person." The police were baffled. Formerly, she had stolen nothing but food and water. She had caused no harm. She simply wished to live in warmth. Upon learning her story, Tanaka didn't even consider filing a burglary report. He was too taken aback by the fact that he had shared his life with an invisible person for an entire year. This narrative sparked intense discussions within Japanese society concerning issues of homelessness and solitude in large cities. Many felt sympathy for the woman who discovered such a resourceful, albeit illegal, method of survival. Tatsuka Harikawa became a symbol of the invisible individuals living amongst us, hidden in the shadows of our prosperity, and a reminder that even within the coziest home, we might not be as alone as we perceive. There you go. Sometimes the most astonishing neighbors are those whose existence we don't even suspect. Check your attic just in case. Just kidding, of course. And now, story number 14. How a porcupine in a tree saved the lives of an entire city. Brazil, Minas Gerais State, 2014. A typical, unremarkable town. People live their lives, work, raise children, and attend church. In the heart of the town, there stands a large old tree in the park. The locals love its shade. Children play football beneath it, and couples arrange their dates there. One quiet Sunday morning, passers-by notice something unusual on a branch, a large, spiky ball. It's a porcupine. A porcupine in a tree in the middle of the city is an uncommon sight, but not extraordinary. Well, an animal climbed up. It happens. Usually, in such cases, firefighters or rescuers are called to remove the creature and return it to the forest. But this porcupine was behaving oddly. He wasn't just sitting, he was falling. And not randomly. He was deliberately making his way down, but doing so clumsily that he would tumble down and thud against the ground with a dull sound, only to climb back up again and fall once more. People gathered around, recording on their phones and laughing. Look how clumsy he is. Maybe he's drunk? However, one old gardener who tended to the park took a closer look. He noticed that the porcupine was falling for a reason. Each time he landed, he left behind several long quills on the grass. And he was doing this in the same spot, right above the tree's roots. The gardener stepped closer. On the ground, amidst the grass, he spotted something that sent a chill down his spine. The porcupine's quills weren't merely embedded in the earth. They were poking through a thick black electric cable that lay slightly buried. The insulation on the cable was old and cracked. The quills had penetrated it thoroughly. The gardener realized this was a high-voltage wire supplying power to the park's lights and the fountain. It was live. If the porcupine hadn't put on his strange act of falling, if his quills hadn't served as peculiar danger indicators, no one would have noticed the exposed wire in the grass. Children played here every day. Dogs ran around, people had picnics. Any careless step or contact with the damp ground after rain could have been fatal. The gardener immediately called the electricians. They arrived, cut the power, and began to dig. It turned out the cable had been damaged by tree roots many years prior. The insulation had rotted, and the ground around was practically electrified, with the instruments spiking dangerously. Cobras, perhaps unknowingly or aware, saved dozens of lives through his peculiar behavior. He might have sensed the vibration of electricity or warmth from the earth and attempted to attack an unseen foe with his quills. Or he could have just been exceptionally clumsy. However, the fact remains that this spiny hero prevented a tragedy in the city. The porcupine was carefully captured and examined. He was unharmed. His quills regenerate effortlessly. He was then released into nature reserves far away from the urban area. The tree was fenced off, the cable was replaced, and buried deep underground. The locals still recall this incident with gratitude. They even contemplated erecting a monument to the porcupine in the park, but there were insufficient funds in the budget. Nevertheless, every child in the city is now aware that if they observe peculiar animal behavior, they should pay attention. It may be trying to warn them about something. Nature is wiser than we are, and sometimes help arrives from the most unexpected places, even if it is prickly and falls from a tree. Story number 15. A wooden crate that saved an entire expedition from starving in the Arctic. In 1898, the harsh and relentless land of eternal ice became the backdrop for American explorer Robert Peary, who desperately sought to conquer the North Pole. He organized expedition after expedition, with people perishing, losing fingers to frostbite, and descending into madness from the polar night. Yet Peary was obsessed. During one of these journeys, his ship, the Windward, became trapped in the ice off the coast of Greenland. Winter arrived earlier than expected. Their food supplies dwindled rapidly. Hunting yielded no success. The animals had migrated south. The crew began to starve. The situation was dire. Peary realized that if they did not find food, the expedition was doomed. He dispatched small teams to search for Inuit locals, hoping to barter for even a small amount of meat. One team stumbled upon a strange structure in the middle of the icy wasteland. It was neither an igloo nor a tent, but an enormous wooden crate resembling a coffin, only 5 times larger. It rested directly on the snow, slightly covered with powder. No one was around. No tracks, no signs of life, just this mysterious box. Peary's men approached cautiously. The crate was constructed from rough, weathered planks, darkened by time. Some letters were burned onto it, but they were illegible. The wood was cracked. Fueled by curiosity and hope of finding something useful, perhaps tools or fuel, they pried open the lid. A crowbar struggled to lift the frozen boards, the nails creaked, and inside the crate lay not gold, weapons, or treasure maps. Instead, there was food, hundreds of cans of provisions, meat, vegetables, fruits, condensed milk, biscuits, chocolate, tea, and coffee. Everything was carefully packed, cushioned with straw, and all absolutely fresh despite the cold. It was a true miracle, as if God himself had sent them this gift from the heavens. Starving, exhausted polar explorers pounced on the food. They ate right there in the freezing air, opening cans with knives. But how had this crate come to be in the Arctic? Who left it there, and why? The answer turned out to be just as astonishing as the find itself. The crate was part of a forgotten experiment by the British Admiralty. 30 years prior to Parry's expedition, in 1853, the British dispatched the ship Resolute to search for the missing Franklin expedition, which had vanished without a trace. Captain Henry Kellett of the Resolute, aware of how easy it is to get lost and succumb to starvation in the Arctic, ordered the establishment of supply caches along the route in case any of his crew fell behind or went missing, or if they themselves met with disaster. They built these storage boxes, filled them with the finest canned goods available at the time, when they had already mastered the art of making excellent canned food in lead-sealed tin cans, and left them in prominent locations. However, Kellett's expedition returned home, having abandoned their ship, but that is a different tale. The caches remained untouched for 35 years. For 35 years, this box lay ensconced in ice, waiting for its moment. The canned goods, produced with mid-19th century technology, remained in pristine condition thanks to the permafrost. There were no signs of botulism or rusting inside the cans. For Robert Peary and his men, this proved to be a lifeline. They transferred the supplies to their stranded ship. This was sufficient to survive the winter, await spring, and continue their journey. Without that box, left by a caring British captain half a century before their birth, the narrative of conquering the North Pole could have turned out very differently. Perhaps Peary would have met his demise, and the glory of discovery would have belonged to someone else, or perhaps to no one at all. Thus, a greeting from the past salvaged the future. A can of food that outlasted a generation turned out to be more valuable than any discovery. Imagine the taste of 30-year-old stew in 40-degree frost. A delicacy. Story number 16. How a botanist spy stole a million-pound secret while disguised as a Chinese man. The mid-19th century. The British Empire at the height of its power. The Navy rules the seas. Trade is thriving. Yet there exists one problem, an enormous gaping hole in the budget of the East India Company. The name of this predicament? Tea. The English are fond of tea. They consume it by the liter, morning, noon, and night. It's a national cornerstone. However, there's a catch. All the tea in the world grows solely in China. The Chinese Empire maintains a firm monopoly. Selling seeds or seedlings to foreigners is strictly forbidden under penalty of death. The technology behind production is a closely guarded state secret. England pays China in silver, and this silver drains from the treasury like a river. The British attempt to cultivate tea in their colony in India, but their efforts yield no success. The bushes perish. The taste is awful. They need quality Chinese seedlings, and most importantly, experts familiar with the secrets of fermentation. In desperation, the East India Company decides to take a bold step. They hire Robert Fortune. Robert is a Scottish botanist, a gardener, a man enamored with plants. But for this mission, he must become more than that. He must transform into a spy, a James Bond of the world of flora. The task is daunting. To infiltrate areas of China close to foreigners, where Europeans are prohibited, steal the finest tea varieties, uncover the secrets of production, and smuggle all of it back to India alive. Robert agrees. He shaves his head, leaving only a queue, which he sews onto his cap. Dressed in traditional Chinese attire, he learns the language, albeit with a terrible accent, passing himself off as an immigrant from a distant province as he embarks on his journey. For 3 long years, he travels across China under the guise of a Chinese merchant. This was extraordinarily perilous. He could be exposed at any moment. Local inhabitants, bandits, officials, all posed a threat. Robert survived a pirate attack on the Yangtze River, defending himself with a shotgun. He suffered from fevers, ate with chopsticks, slept on mats, and shared tea with farmers, memorizing their every move. But most importantly, he gathered tea seedlings. He concealed them in specially designed earth-filled boxes, a recent invention known as word boxes, to ensure the plants would survive the long journey. He made a discovery that astonished the botanical community of his era. Before Robert, Europeans believed that black and green tea came from two different plants. However, Robert observed with his own eyes, it was the same bush. The only difference lay in how the leaves were processed. Green tea is simply dried, whereas black tea undergoes fermentation and oxidation. Ultimately, Robert achieved the unbelievable. He smuggled 20,000 elite tea seedlings out of China. Furthermore, in a stroke of genius, he recruited 8 Chinese tea masters who agreed to accompany him to India and teach the locals the entire process. The seedlings thrived in the Himalayas, the Chinese masters imparted their wisdom, and India began to produce tea. Plenty of delicious, strong, and quality tea. Within a generation, Indian tea surpassed Chinese tea in sales volume. China's monopoly crumbled, dealing a devastating blow to the Chinese economy that took decades to recover from. Meanwhile, Britain enjoyed its beloved beverage at an affordable price and became a tea empire. Robert Fortune executed the largest theft of corporate secrets in history, without a single shot being fired, aside from the pirates, using scissors, a shovel, and masquerade. Today, while brewing a bag of Assam or Darjeeling, we rarely consider that we're drinking the result of one of the boldest espionage operations of the 19th century. In every cup lies a drop of Scottish gardener's adventurous spirit. So, would you like some tea? I happen to have some fresh Indian tea right here. Story number 17. The tribe that couldn't count to 3 and drove linguists mad. Brazil, the Amazon. Dense jungles rarely traversed by white people. The 1970s. In the academic world, there exists an unwavering truth. Language shapes thought. A person cannot conceive of something for which they lack a word. If you don't have a word for blue, you can't see the blue color. At least, you can't distinguish it from green. And so, a missionary and linguist by the name of Daniel Everett ventured into the Amazon rainforest. His task was simple: to learn the language of the local Pitaha tribe, translate the Bible, and convert them to Christianity. A typical assignment for a missionary. However, the Pitaha tribe turned out to be quite extraordinary. Daniel arrived with all his European logic, grammar, and beliefs. As he began studying their language, he was in for a shock. The Pitaha lacked words for colors. There was absolutely no term for red, green, or yellow. They spoke simply, like blood, like leaves. All right, we've covered the flowers, but what came next was even more intriguing. They had no words to express time, no concepts for tomorrow or yesterday, no year or month. They existed in an absolute, infinite now. The past held no significance for them, nor did the future. However, the most profound blow to contemporary linguistics came from their counting system. The Pitaha had no numerals whatsoever. No 1, 2, 3. There was absolutely no arithmetic. Instead, they possessed just 2 terms for quantity, a little and a lot. Imagine giving a Pitaha 3 fish. He would say, few. Hand him 10 fish and he would state, many. If you took 1 fish away from the pile of 10, he would look at you, smile, and again proclaim, many. For him, nothing had changed. Daniel tried to teach them how to count. He arranged pebbles and drew sticks with no success. They simply could not grasp the concept of numbers. Why count when there are plenty of fish? Or, if there aren't, they could just go catch more. This tribe lived without stress, without plans for the future, without debts or loans. They were probably the happiest people on earth. They laughed almost all the time, napped in 20-minute stretches whenever they chose, ate when hungry, and never hoarded food. Daniel lived with them for 30 years. He arrived to change their beliefs, yet in the end, they transformed him. The Pitaha were the only people in the world without creation myths. They found it utterly uninteresting. Who created the world? Daniel would ask. We don't know, the natives shrugged. Have you seen the one who created it? No. Has your father seen him? No. Then why are you telling us about it? Their logic was impeccable. They only believed in what they had seen with their own eyes, or what a person they personally knew had witnessed. No abstractions, no gods residing in the heavens whom no one had seen. Ultimately, Daniel Everett became an atheist. He realized that these people did not need religion to be happy and kind to one another. They had no concept of sin, no wars, no suicides. They did not even comprehend how one could take their own life. Linguists worldwide continue to debate the Piraha phenomenon, but Noam Chomsky, the greatest linguist of modern times, deemed their language impossible. According to his theory, all languages should possess recursion, nested clauses like the house that Jack built. The Piraha's language lacks recursion. They speak in simple phrases. Jack built a house. The house is big. The Piraha demonstrated that the human brain can function entirely differently than we are accustomed to. Without numbers, without time, without color. And yet, people can be wholly happy. Perhaps we should learn from them. Stop counting likes, years, and money, and just live in the present moment. So, feeling philosophical? I suggest we take a break and enjoy another cup of tea or coffee. As the Piraha might say, a lot of tea or a little tea. Story number 18. The farmer who propped open a door with the most expensive meteorite in the world. Michigan, 2018. An ordinary farmer named David Mazurek. He lives in his old house, managing the household chores, and he has a shed, a tractor, and a ton of various junk that has accumulated over the years. Listen, each of us has such junk. Old newspapers, rusty nails, odd stones collected from walks. David had one of those stones too. A large, heavy, dark boulder weighing around 10 kilograms. It had been sitting in his shed for 30 years. David used it as a doorstop, to prevent it from slamming shut in the wind. Very convenient. The stone is heavy. It holds the door securely. One day, while David was watching television, there was a segment about meteorites, discussing how people find them and sell them for outrageous prices. David glanced at his doorstop. He thought, what if? He recalled the story of that stone. When he bought the farm back in 1988, the previous owner showed him this boulder and said, "This is a meteorite. We saw it fall on our property in the 30s. It was still warm when we dug it up." At the time, David didn't think much of it. A meteorite is a meteorite. The main thing was that it held the door. But now, after 30 years, curiosity took over. David picked up his stone, put it in the trunk of his pickup, and drove to Central Michigan University to see geologist Mona Sabisky. Mona, to be honest, was skeptical. People constantly brought her all sorts of rocks claiming they were meteorites. Usually, they turned out to be just pieces of slag or iron ore, meteorongs as she called them. But when David took his stone out of the trunk, Mona's eyes widened. She instantly realized this was not just any rock, it was something special. She conducted X-ray tests, a chemical analysis, and confirmed, yes, this is a genuine meteorite, and not just any meteorite, but an iron-nickel one, which is very rare. It consists of 88% iron and 12% nickel. But the most important detail was its size, 10 kilograms. This is the 6th largest meteorite ever found in Michigan, and it's worth $100,000. $100,000 for a stone that had sat in dust for 30 years, propping open a shed door. David was stunned. He immediately sold the meteorite to the university. He donated half of the money to charity. By the way, scientists named it the Edmar meteorite. It now rests in a museum under glass with a beautiful plaque. David bought himself a new door, or at least a new doorstop. But the story doesn't end there. It turns out the previous owner of the farm wasn't lying. The meteorite did indeed fall in the 30s, and it was genuinely warm. It's just that no one then knew its true worth. Isn't it amusing? We often search for treasures far away. They might be lying right at our feet, or propping open the door to a shed. Perhaps you too have a strange rock at your summer house. Take a closer look at it. It may just be a messenger from space, worth a fortune. Story number 19. the man who broke reality and became the first space tourist long before Gagarin. The beginning of the 20th century, America, California. A young man named George Adamski. He worked in a cafe on Mount Palomar, not far from the famous observatory. An ordinary guy with a passion for astronomy and fantasy. However, George was not merely a dreamer. He was, let's say, an exceptionally persuasive storyteller. In 1952, George proclaimed that he had encountered an alien right in the Mojave Desert. According to him, the extraterrestrial was a handsome man with long blonde hair, dressed in a jumpsuit. The alien, named Orton, had come from Venus. Yes, the very same planet where the temperature reaches plus 400 degrees and acid rain falls from the sky. Yet this did not deter George. He claimed that the Venusians lived underground in paradise-like settings. George didn't just share a tall tale, he presented photographs. The images displayed strange, blurry objects in the sky. Flying saucers, the classic type seen in films, complete with domes and portholes. The world went wild. George's book, Flying Saucers Have Landed, became a bestseller. Crowds flocked to his cafe to hear tales of cosmic brothers. He even founded a kind of cult, preaching peace and love in the name of the Venusians. But the most intriguing part came later. George declared that the aliens had taken him for a ride. He recounted his journey to Venus in excruciating detail, describing how they traveled through space, gazed at stars, sipped nectar, and how Venusians lived in crystal cities without knowledge of war. Scientists, of course, scoffed. Astronomers shook their heads, but George remained steadfast. He even showcased Orton's boot prints in the sand. However, it was later revealed that the souls had been crafted from coffee cans. George Adamski became the first person in history to claim contact with extraterrestrials and even provided evidence. He met Queen Juliana of the Netherlands and even the Pope. Rumor had it that he was awarded a gold medal by the Pope for his contributions to peace. But here's the twist. Years later, when space probes actually reached Venus and sent back the first images, it turned out to be a hellish landscape. No crystal cities, no blonde in jumpsuits, only molten lead and pressure of 90 atmospheres. By that time, George had already passed away, leaving behind a legion of followers and a multitude of mysteries. Were his photographs fakes? Experts likely concluded that the flying saucers in the pictures were simply streetlight covers or chicken feeders. Nevertheless, George gifted humanity a dream that we are not alone in the universe, that there are benevolent brothers out there who wish to help us, and that space is not a cold void, but a realm full of wonders. George Adamski, the greatest hoaxer of the 20th century, or a prophet misunderstood by us. Who knows, perhaps Venusians truly exist, merely living in a different dimension. Amusing, isn't it? Sometimes the most incredible story turns out to be just a product of the imagination of one highly talented storyteller. Yet, without such storytellers, our world would be considerably duller. Story number 20. The day New York was taken over by giant rubber ducks. 1992. The Pacific Ocean. A massive container ship is on its way from Hong Kong to America. On board, there are thousands of containers filled with products, toys, clothing, electronics, everything we cherish so much. Suddenly, a storm brews. The waves rise to the heavens. The ship tilts. One of the containers breaks free from its moorings and crashes into the raging sea with a loud thud. The container sinks, but not right away. It collides with rocks somewhere near the Hawaiian Islands, and out spills, you won't believe it, 29,000 rubber ducks for the bath. Yellow ducklings, red beavers, blue turtles, and green frogs. A whole army of bath toys, neatly packed in cardboard boxes. The cardboard soaks quickly in the salty water, and the plastic figures are liberated, embarking on their grand adventure. 29,000 toys are carried by the ocean currents. They divide into several groups. One heads south to the shores of Australia and Indonesia, another goes north to the Bering Strait, and a third crosses the Pacific Ocean towards South America. Oceanographers, upon hearing this news, were thrilled. Normally, they use expensive buoys with sensors to study currents, but here are free, colorful floating markers, thousands of them. Oceanographer Curtis Esmore began tracking the toys' journey. He even gave them a name, the Friendship Fleet. The ducklings traveled thousands of kilometers. Some got stuck in Arctic ice, others crossed the equator, and a few reached the shores of Scotland and Newfoundland. However, the most astonishing event occurred 15 years later in 2007. One group of ducks, having traveled through the Arctic Ocean, became trapped in ice, thawed, froze again, and finally reached the Atlantic Ocean, where the Gulf Stream swept them right to the shores of Great Britain and Shaw. Imagine the surprise of the residents of Cornwall's coastline when faded, sun-bleached, yet still recognizable yellow ducklings, travelers with a 15-year journey, began appearing on the beach. Collectors launched a real hunt for these toys. One such duck could fetch up to $1,000. After all, it was not just a toy, but a genuine scientific artifact that had traversed half the world. Thanks to these ducks, scientists managed to create the most accurate map of ocean currents. They learned about water cycles they had only speculated about before, and discovered how trash travels across the planet. The Friendship Fleet became a symbol of globalization and ecological issues. The plastic that takes centuries to decompose can travel indefinitely. Yet in this story, there's a silver lining. The little yellow ducklings, lost in the vast ocean, helped people better understand our planet and brought joy to thousands of children and adults who found them on beaches all over the world. Isn't it amusing? Sometimes, even trash can become a scientific treasure, and an ordinary toy can be a great adventurer. Story number 21. How the craftiest con man deceived an entire army by simply throwing a party. France, the city of Alem. The year was 1814. The Napoleonic Wars have just ended. Europe exhales. The victors, Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Britain, are deciding how to divide the world. A congress gathers in Alem. Kings, emperors, ministers, and the entire European aristocracy are present. The city is flooded with troops, particularly a significant number of Russian Cossacks. They serve as an exotic spectacle for Europeans. Bearded men in hats wielding pikes patrol the streets, maintaining order and, frankly, growing somewhat bored. Amid this atmosphere of seriousness and political intrigue, our protagonist, James Coates, makes his entrance. James was not merely an Englishman. He was an adventurer, a magician, and, as one might say today, a brilliant prankster. He earned a living by orchestrating astonishing tricks and wagers. In the town of Aquina, he wagered with the wealthy locals for a substantial sum of money. The bet was straightforward. I will prove to you that I can give orders to an entire army, and they will obey. Laughter erupted in the room. Who do you think you are? Just an ordinary magician? They won't even let you near the barracks. But James smiled and replied, "Watch this." The very next day, he found the most important person in town. No, not the emperor or the minister. He located the head baker, the one responsible for making bread for the entire occupying army. James handed him a sack of gold and said, "Tonight, you will bake no bread at all, not a single loaf. Just say the oven broke down. Here's some money for repairs and for your silence." Naturally, the baker agreed. The money was enormous. The following morning, the city descended into chaos. Soldiers received no bread. Not for Russian Cossacks, nor Prussian grenadiers, nor Austrian hussars. No one. And bread is essential to a soldier's diet. The soldiers began to grumble, and the officers grew anxious. The commander of the garrison was furious. What had happened? Where was the bread? "The oven is broken, Your Excellency. We are fixing it," they responded. By lunchtime, the starving soldiers were ready to revolt. Then, once again, James Coates made his move. He printed thousands of leaflets on quality paper, using elegant font, and plastered them all over the city. The leaflet read something to the effect of, "The great and generous English Lord Sir James Coates, witnessing the suffering of brave liberating warriors left without bread due to the incompetence of unworthy bakers, invites all soldiers and officers to his countryside villa. There, a feast awaits you. Roasted bulls, barrels of wine, and, most importantly, mountains of fresh, warm bread. Free of charge. Come one, come all." And he included the address of the villa he had rented on the outskirts of town. What ensued? Starving soldiers, upon reading this, believed it to be a command from their superiors. What other explanation could there be? Someone had to feed them, and so they marched. No, they didn't just march. They surged forward. A whole army, tens of thousands strong. Cossacks, hussars, grenadiers. Together they abandoned their posts, their sentries, their patrols, and headed for the villa of the generous English lord. Officers attempted to intervene, but it was too late. The famished throng swept away everything in their path. James Coates stood on the balcony of his villa alongside the wealthy locals he had wagered against. He pointed towards the river of soldiers in uniform flowing toward his home and said, "Well, gentlemen, did I not give an order to the army?" The wealthy individuals were left in shock. Silently, they handed him his winnings. But what about the soldiers? They arrived at the villa only to find nothing. No bulls, no wine, no bread. Just an empty house and a cunning Englishman on the balcony. While the soldiers were trying to figure things out and the officers were striving to restore order, chaos erupted in the city. Posts were deserted, and there was no security. During this time, James's accomplices quietly looted several jewelry stores and bank offices. By the moment the hungry and angry army returned to the city, James Coates and his money had vanished without a trace. He melted away into the night, leaving behind a legend of the most brilliant and bloodless heist in history. He did not wield a weapon. He employed psychology in the absence of fresh bread. Isn't that amusing? Sometimes the most powerful army in the world can find itself powerless against a clever individual with a sack of gold and a brilliant idea. Story number 22. The most successful student in the world who never existed. Autumn 1927, America, state of Georgia. The corridors of a prestigious technological institute buzz with the voices of thousands of freshmen. The air is thick with the scent of fresh printing ink, damp woolen coats, and a hint of panic. Students jostle in lines to fill out their admission forms. Bureaucracy, boredom, the scratch of pens. In one such line stands a young man named William Edgar Smith, an ordinary freshman, nothing remarkable. When it's his turn, a weary clerk at the admissions office mistakenly hands him not one, but two forms to fill out. The papers had stuck together. Most of us would simply return the extra sheet, but William was a guy with imagination. He glanced at the blank form. The empty space for a name beckoned him, like a blank canvas to an artist. At that moment, a completely crazy yet brilliant plan was conceived in his mind. He filled out the first form honestly, but on the second, with a slight alteration in handwriting, he wrote the invented name George P. Burdell. He submitted both forms, and the system accepted them. From that day forward, William began a double life. Honestly, it was a titanic effort. He attended lectures and completed homework for himself, and then, late at night, he would grab another pen, change the slant of his letters, and write coursework for George. Imagine the level of determination required. During roll calls in lectures, when strict professors would take attendance, it turned into a real show. "Smith, here, sir." "Burdell." Silence. Pause. Shuffle. And then someone from the back of the class, changing his voice to a point of being unrecognizable, would hoarsely shout, "Here, Professor!" Before long, William's friends uncovered George's secret, and the prank reached epic proportions. The students banded together to support the legend. They slipped George's tests into the common pile when the instructor looked away. They signed him up for sports teams. George became a member of a prestigious student fraternity. On paper, he played basketball and attended parties. The professors assigned excellent grades to the fictional student. George turned out to be an incredibly talented guy, much more successful than many real slackers. Years passed, and in 1930, the inevitable happened. George P. Burdell successfully fulfilled all the requirements of the curriculum, and the administration of the institute ceremoniously issued an official bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering in his name. Phantom obtained higher education. However, George's story did not end there. The graduates scattered across the country, but they took the legend with them. When the turbulent 40s arrived and the former students donned military uniforms, George enlisted to serve alongside them. Bomber pilots in Tightcom recorded his name in their flight logs. Official reports indicated that brave George P. Burdell undertook dozens of combat missions over Europe. Commanders praised the elusive hero. Later, in the 50s, George married a fictitious student from another college. He regularly subscribed to popular newspapers and magazines. The ghost's name appeared on the boards of directors of major companies, undoubtedly thanks to the pranking alumni who held high positions. The climax of this tale occurred in the early 2000s. A very prominent and influential news magazine decided to conduct an online poll for the title of Person of the Year. College students recollected their favorite. They devised clever programs, hacked the site's algorithms, and began voting en masse. At one point, George Pilpurdy, a man of the air, was confidently leading in the global rankings, surpassing presidents, scientists, and pop stars. The magazine had to hastily remove him from the lists manually. Today, the administration of that very technological institute has long come to terms with its fate. They recognize George as the greatest alumnus in their history. A student shop is named in his honor. Sometimes, a course taught by Professor Burdell unexpectedly appears in the schedule, and students still eagerly enroll in it. Thus, an ordinary bureaucratic error coupled with a pinch of student mischief created an immortal persona, one who never breathed, slept, or ate, yet lived such a rich life that any of us would envy. Story number 20. The Jinx who became the worst player in the world but beat the system with fake mustaches. England, autumn 1974. An industrial, eternally gray and rainy town called Barrow-in-Furness. There lived an ordinary guy named Morris Flitcroft. He was 45 years old. He worked as a crane operator at the port. To be honest, Morris's life was not the most vibrant. The clanging of metal, oil, heavy boots, and tea from a thermos defined his days. But one day Morris bought a color television, a true rarity for a simple worker at the time. He turned it on, fiddled with the dials, and unexpectedly stumbled upon a broadcast of a golf tournament. Imagine that contrast: gray factory pipes outside, and the screen displaying emerald, perfectly manicured lawns. Silence. Elegant gentlemen in crisp white shirts leisurely strolled with their clubs. No hustle and bustle. Pure, concentrated aristocracy. Suddenly, something clicked in the port crane operator's mind. He looked at his wife and, in all seriousness, proclaimed, "You know, dear, I am going to win the Open Championship of Great Britain in golf." His wife merely sighed. Morris had never held a golf club in his life. He did not engage in sports at all. But once Morris decided on something, he ordered the cheapest, second-hand set of clubs through the mail. Lacking the funds to gain access to a real golf club, he began practicing directly on the local sandy beach and in the vacant lot behind his house. Instead of holes, he utilized molehills. He read an instructional book, studied the pictures, and attempted to mimic the stance of champions. To be honest, his efforts were abysmal. He hit more rocks and clumps of dirt than he did golf balls. A year and a half passed. It was the year 1976. Time had come to submit entries for the famous championship, the most prestigious tournament in the kingdom. Morris filled out the application form. There was a tricky question. Are you an amateur or a professional? If you are an amateur, you need to provide an official certificate from your club verifying your skill level. Naturally, Morris did not possess such a certification. However, if you checked the box for professional, the organizers took your word for it. No sane person would enter a tournament of such caliber without being able to play. Morris marked the box next to the word professional, sent off his application, and, surprisingly, it was accepted. And so came the day of the qualifying round. The elite golf club was buzzing with sponsors, millionaires, and sports journalists. Everyone was dressed in branded attire. Then came Morris. In a cheap sweater over a turtleneck, wearing ill-fitting trousers and plastic shoes bought on sale, he pulled out his worn-out clubs. The organizers eyed him suspiciously, but, according to the rules, he was entitled to play. Morris stepped up to the first hole, took a swing. Silence. A pause, then a hit. A clump of dirt flew in one direction, while the ball sadly rolled just a couple of meters in the other. Honestly, it was a total disaster. Professionals typically completed such a course in about 70 strokes. Morris finished the round with a score of 121. 121 strokes. This was officially the worst result recorded in the tournament's history. Balls soared into bushes, water hazards, and even toward the spectators. The organizers initially looked bewildered, then turned red with embarrassment, and finally green with rage. This was an affront to the ancient and noble game. Morris was shamefully expelled from the course. The sports committee issued a special decree banning Morris Fleetcraft from approaching official golf tournaments for life. Most people would have given up and fallen into depression, but not our hero. Morris took it as a challenge. He decided that if he couldn't play under his own name, he would play under someone else's. The following year, a mysterious American professional named Gene Pachecki appeared on the participant list. The organizers happily accepted the entry. On the course stepped a man with luxurious thick mustaches and a cap pulled down over his eyes. He took a swing, and the ball flew straight into the nearest puddle. The organizers took a closer look. The treacherous mustache began peeling off. It was Morris again. He was unceremoniously escorted out once more. A couple of years later, a mysterious Swiss player named Gerald Hoppe submitted an application. Then there was someone named Arnold Palmtree, a clear parody of the famous champion Arnold Palmer. Morris employed fake beards, wigs, and dark glasses, even coloring his hair with shoe polish. He invented unbelievable accents. This turned into a national comedy. Stiff and stern judges with magnifying glasses scrutinized the faces of the qualification participants, attempting to unmask the elusive crane operator. Meanwhile, the media and the general public absolutely adored Morris. He became a folk hero, a symbol that golf is a game for everyone, not just for wealthy snobs. Although Morris never mastered the game, he achieved his goal. He injected a dose of genuine absurdity and fun into the incredibly serious and dull world of elite sports, proving that when a door closes, you can always buy some cheap fake mustaches and sneak in through a window. What a delightful audacity, don't you think? Sometimes being the worst in the world is a talent of its own, requiring immense courage. Story number 24. A city that does not appear on the map, yet thousands of free-spirited individuals reside there. California, the Colorado Desert, not far from the border with Mexico. Hot, dusty, with the wind scattering tumbleweeds. Here, amid the cactus rocks, lies a peculiar place known as Slab City, or, as the locals call it, the last free place in America. The history of this town began during World War II, when a Marine Corps base was established here. Soldiers trained to shoot cannons in the desert. After the war ended, the base was shut down and the buildings were demolished, leaving only the concrete slabs of the foundations. In the 1950s, the first people started arriving. Initially, they were workers scavenging for scrap metal, followed by hippies, drifters, and retirees who couldn't afford to live in expensive cities. They set up their trailers and tents right on the old concrete slabs for free. The land is unwanted. Although it belongs to the state, the authorities have forgotten about it. There is no plumbing, no sewage, no electricity, and no garbage collection. It would seem like hell on earth, but it's not. Slab City has evolved into a unique social experiment. Thousands of people live here. In winter, when the heat subsides, the population swells to 4,000. During the summer heat, the hardiest stay behind, around 150 individuals. How do they manage to live? They generate electricity using solar panels crafted from old parts. Water is delivered in tanks from the nearby town of Nyland. They bathe in hot springs that emerge nearby. However, the most astonishing aspect is not the living conditions, but the atmosphere. There are no laws in Slab City. The police rarely come here, yet chaos is absent. The residents have self-organized. They have their own library in an old trailer, a solar-powered internet cafe, and an open-air nightclub called The Range, where musicians perform every Saturday night. They even have a golf course, although it's just sand with holes, no grass. Artists live here, turning trash into art. The most famous art piece is Salvation Mountain. Leonard Knight, a local resident, spent 30 years building it from clay, straw, and thousands of liters of paint donated by tourists. It's a gigantic, vibrant hill adorned with messages of love for God, visible even from space. In Slab City, money in the conventional sense does not exist. People barter goods and services. You fix my generator, and I will bake you bread. You give me a haircut, and I'll provide you with a can of gasoline. Certainly, this is not paradise. It's hot, dusty, and at times dangerous here. Yet for many inhabitants, this is the only place where they truly feel free. No one tells them how to live, no one demands taxes, and no one judges them for their unusual appearance or lifestyle. Sep City is living proof that a society can exist without a government, that people are capable of coming together and helping each other, even if they possess nothing but an old trailer and a slab of concrete beneath their feet. The state authorities periodically threaten to dismantle this encampment and sell the land, but for now, Sep City remains. It's a ghost town that is more alive than many large cities, a place for free-spirited artists and stubborn dreamers amid the scorching desert. Isn't that amusing? We construct skyscrapers, install fiber optics, pay mortgages, while some simply come to the desert, pitch a tent on an old concrete slab, and proclaim, "I am home, and I am happy." So, do you crave freedom, or is air conditioning and a shower more appealing to you? Story number 25. The Mystery of the Coral Castle, built by a man, a riddle intertwined with the power of love. Florida, early 20th century. Sun, palm trees, alligators. In this idyllic location arrives a small, frail man, an immigrant from Latvia. His name is Edward Leedskalnin, 150 centimeters tall, weighing 45 kilograms. Ill, thin, with a perpetual sadness in his eyes. Ed's story is a tragic one. In Latvia, he had a fiancée. He referred to her as my sweet 16. He loved her deeply, but a day before their wedding, she left him with the words, "You are too old and too poor for me." Ed's heart was shattered. He moved to America in search of a new life. But in reality, he was looking for a way to prove his love, and he found it. Edward decided to construct a castle for his unfulfilled bride. Not just any home, but a genuine medieval castle made of gigantic coral blocks, and he began building it, alone. Listen, this is the most incredible part. This small, sickly man single-handedly cut massive coral boulders from the ground, without modern machinery, cranes, or excavators. Some of these blocks weighed 30 tons. 30 tons is the weight of several elephants. How he accomplished this remains a profound mystery. When neighbors inquired about his methods, he would simply smile and say, "I have deciphered the secrets of the Egyptian pyramids. I know how to manage weight." He worked exclusively at night by the light of a kerosene lamp. No one ever saw him at work. Neighbors could only hear strange buzzing sounds that resembled singing. Yet the results were astonishing. Edward constructed an entire complex, 2-meter-high walls, a 2-story tower where he resided, furniture made of stone, tables, chairs, beds, a bathtub, a stone telescope perfectly aimed at the North Star, a sundial that kept time accurate to the minute, and, most remarkably, 9-ton gates. These gates were so perfectly balanced that even a child could open them with a gentle push of a finger. They rotated on an old truck bearing that Ed had found at a junkyard. When, in the 1980s, the bearing broke, it required a 6-ton crane and a crew of engineers just to move those gates, yet Edward had installed them by himself. Once, he found himself needing to relocate his castle to a new spot, situated 16 kilometers away, and he enlisted the services of a truck driver. The driver arrived in the morning, and all the blocks had already been loaded onto the platform. Ed simply told him, "Look away for a moment." As the driver turned his back, he heard a creak, glanced back, and saw that the 30-ton block was already on the ground. Scholars are still scratching their heads over his methods. Some suggest anti-gravity, others mention acoustic levitation, while a few theorize about elaborate systems of pulleys and levers that he kept hidden from prying eyes. However, Edward himself claimed that he constructed it all out of love. He hoped that his sweet 16-year-old would hear of his feat, come to Florida, and marry him. He never got to see her. She never came. Edward died alone in 1951, leaving behind this wonder as a monument to his broken heart. Today, Coral Castle stands as a tourist attraction. Visitors from around the globe arrive to marvel at the creation of a small man with immense love and an unknown secret. And when you view those gigantic stones fitted together without a trace of cement, you begin to ponder that perhaps it's not anti-gravity at work. Maybe true love really can move mountains. What a thought. Sometimes, the greatest things are accomplished not for fame, but for the sake of a single person who may never even know. Story number 26 tells of a battle won by 3 drunken hussars and a barrel of schnapps. In September 1788, the Austrian Empire was at war with the Ottoman Empire, meaning the Turks. It was a common occurrence during those times. Kings and sultans were in constant dispute over something or other. The Austrian army, numbering 100,000, was camped near the town of Karanshebesh, located in modern-day Romania. This massive, well-armed force was awaiting the Turks to engage them in decisive combat. One dull evening, the commander sent out a squad of hussars, the elite light cavalry, for reconnaissance. "Go take a look," he instructed, "and see if you spot any Turks on the other side of the river." The hussars crossed the river only to find nothing. It was quiet, save for the cicadas chirping. However, they did stumble upon a gypsy camp, and the gypsies had several barrels of excellent strong schnapps. The hussars deemed the reconnaissance a tedious task and decided it warranted immediate sampling. They bought all the schnapps from the gypsies and threw a party right by the riverbank. An hour later, another Austrian battalion, infantry this time, arrived at the same bank for reconnaissance. Upon spotting the drunken hussars with their schnapps, the infantrymen naturally demanded their share, but the now very tipsy hussars refused to share. "The schnapps is ours, we found it first." A quarrel ensued, which escalated into a fight, and then one of the more disgruntled infantrymen fired a shot into the air. That's when the disaster struck. In the dark, amidst the drunken revelry, one of the hussars shouted, "Turks! The Turks are coming!" Panic ensued. The hussars mounted their horses and dashed back to their camp. The infantry, thinking this was Turkish cavalry, opened fire on them. Meanwhile, the guards at the main camp on the opposite bank heard the gunshots. An officer, confused about the situation, shouts, "Alarm! The Turks are attacking!" The army jumps to their feet, and gunners begin loading their cannons. Suddenly, from the shadows, a cavalry unit charges at them with shouts. This was the very group of drunken hussars fleeing from their own infantry. "Turkish cavalry, fire!" commands the officer. The Austrian artillery opens fire on their very own cavalry. Chaos erupts in the camp. Gunfire rings out in every direction. The infantry shoots at the cavalry slashes at the infantry. The Germans, who could not understand the shouts from their Romanian and Serbian allies, believed they had been betrayed and began shooting indiscriminately. The army commander, desperate to restore order amidst the chaos, shouted, "Stop! Stop! Halt! Halt!" However, the soldiers, with limited knowledge of German, misheard the cry as "Allah! Allah!" thinking that the Turks had already breached their camp. Panic reached its peak. The 100,000-strong army, convinced they were battling massive Turkish forces, began to retreat. No, not just retreat, they fled. They abandoned cannons, supply wagons, and the wounded. They trampled each other in the darkness. An entire army turned into a state of panic, fleeing from itself. In the morning, a real Turkish army arrived on the battlefield. They halted in astonishment. Before them lay a field strewn with the bodies of Austrian soldiers, 10,000 of them. Wounded men, abandoned cannons, tents. Without firing a single shot, the Turks had taken the city of Karansebesht. This was the most disgraceful and absurd battle in the history of warfare. The Austrian army had defeated itself due to a few barrels of schnapps and one drunken quarrel. Amusing, isn't it? Sometimes the most formidable enemy isn't the one standing in front of you with a dagger, but rather the one sitting beside you by the fire and refusing to share their drink. So, shall we pour ourselves a cup of tea to toast for peace worldwide and for scouts to always remain sober? Story number 27. A photographer who stole the soul of an entire tribe and accidentally became a god. Papua New Guinea, the 1930s. Wild jungles into which no white man has yet stepped. Here live tribes that have never seen metal, wheels, or clothing beyond loincloths. They believe in spirits, ancestors, and magic. Into these jungles ventures Australian prospector and amateur photographer Michael Leahy, accompanied by his brother and a camera. They seek gold, but discover people, thousands of people. In a valley thought to be uninhabited, live tribes whose existence was unknown. Michael pulls out his camera, a bulky box on 3 legs. He wishes to capture this historic moment, first contact. He aims the lens at the tribal chief. Upon seeing the strange, shiny eye trained on him, the chief freezes in terror, convinced it is a weapon or a magical tool that will soon extract his soul. Michael clicks the shutter. Snap. The magnesium flash blinds everyone in the vicinity. The chief collapses to the ground, shielding his face with his hands. He awaits death. But nothing happens. He is still alive. Michael, pleased with the shot, takes out a small mirror from his pocket and shows the chief his reflection. The chief gazes into the mirror, seeing his own likeness, the spirit. He falls to his knees once more. To the Papuans, Michael and his brother became gods, white spirits who descended from the heavens. Their clothing, their canned goods, their rifles, all of it seemed like magic. But the most fascinating part came later. Michael decided to showcase the magic of cinema to them. He brought along a portable projector and film. In the evening, he gathered the entire tribe in a clearing, hung a white sheet between the trees, and started the generator. A beam of light sliced through the darkness, and living, moving people appeared on the sheet. They walked, laughed, and ate. The Papuans were frozen in awe. They believed they were witnessing their ancestors, spirits returning from the realm of the dead. They began to cry, scream, and reach out towards the screen. Some threw spears at it, trying to kill the spirits. Others fell to their knees. Michael, seeing the reaction, realized he had gone too far. He turned off the projector, but it was too late. The tribe had believed. They began to bring him gifts, pigs, sweet potatoes, women. They pleaded, "Show us our ancestors again. Bring them back." Michael attempted to explain that these were merely images, a technology. But how does one explain cinema to people who had invented a stone axe just the day before? He became a hostage of his own magic. He had to flee the valley, abandoning all his gold to escape the overwhelming affection of his newfound followers. This story became a legend. It illustrated how easily technology can be mistaken for miracles and how dangerous it is to play God with people who are unprepared for it. Years later, when civilization had finally arrived in those lands, the Papuans smiled as they recalled that day. They had come to understand what cinema was. Yet, the legend of the white spirit with the magical eye who stole their souls and hid them in a box still lives on. Isn't it amusing? We are accustomed to smartphones and cameras, and hardly ever ponder upon the miracle we hold in our hands. For some, it's just a selfie, while for others, it's a portal to the spirit world. Story number 28. The doctor who shot himself out of a cannon to cure his cough. America. The end of the 10th century. Dr. James Eyre, a respected surgeon, professor, a serious man, sporting a beard and glasses. He treats patients, delivers lectures, and writes articles for medical journals. However, the doctor has one small problem. He suffers from chronic bronchitis. He coughs so violently that the walls shake, medications fail, and inhalations are useless. He has tried everything, from mustard plasters to the latest pills. Nothing works. Then one day, while sitting in his office and coughing once again, Dr. Eyre muses, "What if the cause of my cough isn't germs but rather stagnation in my lungs? What if I just need to give my body a good shake?" The idea seems insane, but being a man of science, he begins to experiment. First, he tries skydiving. At the time, this was a rarity. It helps, but only for a short while. Then he rides the scariest roller coasters, also temporarily effective. He needs a more intense shake-up. That's when he sees an advertisement in a newspaper. Circus, human cannonball, flight from a cannon. Dr. Eyre goes to the circus, gazes at the huge shiny cannon with its explosive charge and thinks, "This is it. This is exactly what I need." He negotiates with the circus director and pays him the fee. On the designated day, the doctor dons a special suit and climbs into the cannon. The director lights the fuse. Kaboom! Dr. Air shoots out of the cannon at the speed of a bullet, soaring through the entire circus dome and landing in a special net. The audience is ecstatic. Applause erupts. The doctor extricates himself from the net, brushes himself off, and doesn't cough at all. The shockwave from the shot, the G-force during the flight, and the adrenaline did their job. His bronchi cleared. His lungs inhaled deeply. The cough vanished as if it had never existed. Dr. Air was thrilled. He penned an article for a medical journal titled, "The Treatment of Bronchitis by Cannon Shot." Of course, his colleagues raised their eyebrows, but the doctor remained steadfast. He began visiting the circus regularly to shoot himself from the cannon. Each time, he felt better. He even started recommending this method to his patients. Can you imagine? A patient walks in with a cough, and you tell him, "You need to urgently go to the circus, my good man, to the cannon." Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, this treatment method never gained traction in conventional medicine. It was just too extreme, and there weren't enough cannons to go around. However, Dr. Air lived a long life and passed away from old age without ever curing his love for flying. Isn't that amusing? We search for complex medications, yet sometimes the best remedy for all ailments is simply a good kick in the rear, quite literally. Story number 29. The chef who forgot the recipe and accidentally invented chips. United States, mid-19th century. Saratoga Springs, New York, a luxurious resort for the wealthy. Here, at Moon's Snail House, a chef named George Crumb works. George is no ordinary man. Half Native American, half African American. Proud, hot-tempered, yet extraordinarily talented, he creates dishes that make the guests salivate. But George has one problem: a customer, a particularly troublesome and picky patron, Cornelius Vanderbilt, a railroad magnate, a millionaire, a man accustomed to perfection. Vanderbilt orders regular fried potatoes, sliced. George cooks and serves them. Vanderbilt tastes them and grimaces. "Too thick, too soft. This isn't potatoes, it's mush," he shouts, sending the dish back to the kitchen. George is furious. How can this be? His masterpiece has been rejected. He slices the potatoes thinner, fries them again, and serves them. Vanderbilt is still displeased. They're still too thick, lacking crunch. And that's when George explodes. He decides to teach the arrogant millionaire a lesson. He takes a potato, slices it paper thin, thinner than a hair, tosses the slices into boiling oil, fries them until crispy, generously sprinkles salt on them, and presents them to Vanderbilt with a sly grin. "Here, choke on these." Vanderbilt takes a bite. Crunch. The room falls silent. Everyone anticipates a scandal. The millionaire is about to throw the plate in the chef's face, but instead, Vanderbilt smiles. "Fantastic," he exclaims. "This is exactly what I wanted. Crispy, salty, perfect." And he devours the entire plate and asks for more. George Crumb is in shock. His revenge has turned into triumph. The dish instantly becomes a sensation. It's dubbed Saratoga chips. All the wealthy patrons visiting the resort start demanding only those. George opened his own restaurant, where each table featured a basket filled with those crispy slices. However, what's most intriguing is that George never patented his invention. He regarded it merely as a joke, an act of revenge. A mistake, it turns out. Soon, the chips began to be produced on an industrial scale. Initially, they were sold in barrels and by weight, but later packaging was introduced to keep them crispy longer. Today, we crunch on chips around the globe, often unaware that we're enjoying the outcome of a rather successful culinary act of revenge. Funny, isn't it? Sometimes the tastiest creations emerge from anger and the desire to get back at someone, quite literally. Story number 30. A fan who yelled at the coach and accidentally stepped onto the field instead of an England star. Oxford, November 1994. A chilly, drizzly evening. A friendly football match is taking place at the stadium. The famous London club West Ham is playing against the modest local team Oxford City. In the stands sits Steve Davis, an ordinary courier, a tattooed guy with a cigarette in his mouth and a pint of beer in hand. He is a West Ham fan through and through. That evening, he is very displeased. On the field is Lee Chapman, a striker the club recently acquired for a substantial fee. However, Steve believes he is playing terribly. He falls, loses the ball, and fails to hit the target. Steve loses his composure. Standing at the edge of the field, he yells at the top of his lungs, "Hey, Harry!" This is directed at the coach, Harry Redknapp. "Get that donkey off the field. My grandmother plays better. He falls over from the wind." Harry Redknapp, a legendary coach, initially tolerates it, but Steve doesn't let up. He critiques every move, dispenses advice, and curses. In the first half, one West Ham player goes out, then another. The substitutions are almost depleted. Then in the second half, yet another striker gets injured and exits the field. The coach has no substitutes left. Absolutely no one. Harry turns toward the stands and looks directly at Steve, who just screamed yet another insult about the team's performance. "Hey you," shouts the coach. "Yeah, you with the tattoo. You talk so much. I bet you can play as well as you shout." Steve chokes on his beer. "Of course I can. I play better than that Chapman." Harry squints. "What's your shoe size?" 42, answers the astonished Steve. "Perfect. Go to the changing room, put on your kit. You're coming on." Steve thinks it's a joke, a prank. But the team administrator genuinely leads him to the locker room. He is given a real West Ham kit, boots and shin guards. Steve, an ordinary courier who came for a beer and a shout, changes into his favorite club's uniform. He steps onto the field. The crowd is in shock. The stadium announcer is flustered. He approaches the coach and asks, "Harry, who's this? I don't know him. How should I announce him?" Harry Redknapp, without missing a beat, replies, "Haven't you seen the World Cup? That's Tidishov, the famous Bulgarian striker. We just signed him." And the announcer declares to the entire stadium, "West Ham substitution. On the field comes Tidishov." And Steve takes off running. To be honest, he was expecting the fail. He smoked, wasn't in shape, but adrenaline works wonders. He dashed across the field like a madman. He battled for the ball and made passes. And then the climax arrives, the 71st minute of the match. Steve receives the ball. He dribbles past a defender, a true professional, finds himself one-on-one with the goalkeeper, and with a powerful strike, sends the ball into the net. Goal! Steve raises his arms, filled with joy. He scored for his beloved club. The dream of any fan had come true. However, just a second later, the assistant referee raises his flag. Offside! The goal is disallowed. But Steve didn't care. He played nearly an entire half against professionals. He was part of the team. After the match, he sat in the locker room, sipping tea with football stars, unable to wipe the silly, happy grin off his face. When journalists asked Harry Redknapp what that was about, he laughed and replied, "He shouted louder than anyone, so I gave him a chance. And you know what? He played better than that guy we bought for $1 million." This story became a legend in English football. Steve Davis returned to work as a courier, but for the rest of his life, he remained that guy who proved, if you truly love something and are ready to stand by your words, one day the coach might turn to you and ask for your shoe size. Yeah.